News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM. We are KFYO Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. It is 7:43 AM. And on the phone, as promised, is Congressman Arrington. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How you guys doing?
We're doing very well.
Well, we've been talking to Steve Verrett, and he's cheered me up. He says we're going to have a big cotton crop, and so I guess we'll all get new school clothes this year.
Well, I tell you, one thing I think that was impressed upon me in my campaign, and I think we take for granted sometimes because Texas Tech is such a big, it's the largest employer, and then we're the healthcare hub of this region, and on. But billions of dollars are represented and are spent and turned over in our economy because we're the largest cotton patch in the world. And I will tell you, the number one job for me in the People's House, representing the people of West Texas, is to get cotton back in the Farm Bill. So that you just reminded me of the one ball we have to keep our eye on with all the balls in the air and make sure we deliver.
Well, you're exactly right. Because I remember, and this has been some time ago, of looking at a bar graph of what was the most important industries to Lubbock. And, I mean, there was what was in second place then, it almost didn't count. I mean, cotton, you cannot overstate its importance to us.
That's right. That's exactly right. Again, billions of dollars. And what we're reminding, I worked on a letter where we got 109 signatures in the House and about 30 in the Senate, more than we did last year. And it was in there we described to the president, it was a letter to the president asking for some bridge funding between here and the Farm Bill for our cotton producers. But the cotton belt extends from California to Virginia and represents $20 billion in annual revenue and over 125,000 employees. So you're talking about farm implement dealers, cotton strippers and other machines, and cotton gins, which, by the way, over the last 10 years, cotton ginning's been, we've lost about 33%, a third of our cotton gins. We don't have textile mills anymore, but we've lost those, I think, forever. So we've got a lot of work to do, and certainly West Texas and cotton go hand in hand. We got to do a big lift here to get it back into the Farm Bill safety net.
Okay, Congressman. Now I was reading the Texas Tribune, and they brought up the fact that this is a big day. It's 9/11, and that you were actually in Washington at the time. And I guess they got a quote from you. I'm just wondering, how does 9/11 affect you, and also how was it on that day?
Well, it was surreal. You just couldn't imagine. You felt like we were under attack, and in fact we were. But at the time, we didn't know what shoe was going to fall next. I was in the office there in the White House complex, and I was interviewing somebody for a political appointment, and we ended up running out of the building, and I got my team and my truck and went out north towards the place where I was living at the time. But you saw jets scrambling above, you saw the smoke billowing up from the Pentagon, and everybody was screaming that there's a plane coming for the White House, which is why we were running out with people screaming and girls holding their high heels. And you just thought, my gosh, I should be in the safest place in the world, and we're running for our lives. It turned out that the heroes on Flight 93 did what we have seen Americans do over the history of this country to perpetuate this democracy, and they made a tremendous sacrifice. They bum-rushed that pilot and took that plane down, and remember the famous line, "Let's roll," became our rallying cry. So let's not forget 9/11. Let's pray for the families that still grieve and the friends of the victims, but let's remember that terrorism came to our shores. We never imagined it, and President Bush decided right then and there his number one job was going to be to make sure that never happened again. I think that should be every commander-in-chief's first job, is to keep us safe. But we've got to be vigilant. We got to continue to remember that what unites us as Americans is greater than any force that could divide us. And we saw that after 9/11. We've seen it in Harvey, the oneness of this country. And I think we need to see more of that. So lots of it was devastating, but at the same time, you saw spring up some pretty remarkable acts of sacrifice, selflessness, and then just a oneness, and quite frankly, a spiritual renewal where we were, the churches and synagogues and places of worship were filled because we were rocked, and we needed a place to turn for solace and for peace and comfort. And let's be vigilant in that part of our lives too. Let's not wait for the next 9/11 before we begin to renew that part of our lives and our faith.
Yeah,
okay. Congressman, we're going to take a quick break so that we have some time on the other side of the break. Okay,
you got it.
And we'll get you on the other side of the break. Thank you.
News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM. We are KFYO Mornings with Dave King and Matt Martin. And on the phone again with Congressman Jodey Arrington. We have about 6 minutes left in this break, Congressman. I wanted to ask you, of course, Donald Trump made a deal with the Democrats. So how in the world has this affected everybody's mood around Washington?
Well, it cuts both ways, I will admit, and I will talk about that. But I tend to believe that if I were in his shoes, I'm not sure I wouldn't have done the same thing. Let's, not be too surprised if the president doesn't have a lot of confidence in the Senate especially, but Congress works with two chambers, and we couldn't get the first one done. Now, the House, we passed Obamacare repeal, but it got stuck in the Senate. I think he's thinking, number one, we're bumping up against a debt ceiling here, and while we would all prefer to have discussions about how to reform our spending and reform our budget process, we need to get money to our hurricane victims, our fellow Texans in the Gulf. And so he didn't want that to get bogged down in politics and the typical Washington congressional politics. So I respect that and appreciate it. I'm not sure that wasn't the right thing to do. I think we could have gotten something for it. That is, we might have been able to get the funding we need to rebuild the military or something. But at the end of the day, and I've been quoted as saying, and believe this with all my heart, let's not play politics with people's lives. This should be very different. This being hurricane victims, not just in Texas, but now in Florida. So I think it was out of necessity that he did it. He's a very practical guy. Most politicians would have, I think, just gotten bogged down in the quagmire of it. He only extended it for 3 more months, so we're going to have to take up the debt ceiling. Hopefully we'll do something about spending associated with the debt ceiling in 3 months.
But now, most, or at least some Republicans, in my understanding, is they don't necessarily feel this way, the way you do about that.
Yeah, no, there's some that believe that we should have gotten something for that. That is, the Democrats were going to vote for Harvey relief funding. We should have attached something on that would have gotten us something. Here's my point on that. I wouldn't want, if the shoe was on the other foot, the Democrats to do that when you're talking about hurricane victims and a disaster on our soil to our fellow Americans.
Well, Congressman, didn't they do that with Hurricane Rita? Didn't they attach some stuff to that made it where people actually didn't want to vote for that?
I don't think Rita. It was Sandy.
Oh, Sandy. I'm sorry. You're right, Sandy.
Yeah. No, I wasn't here at the time. I know that some Republicans voted against that because there were all kinds of things attached that were not germane to the issue at hand, the disaster. In this case, we had the president negotiate extending or suspending, rather, the debt ceiling. I think that was the reality, that we couldn't get him the money because we were so close bumping up against the debt ceiling. So I think he played it right. We're going to have to do this again in 3 months. At that point, we'll find out if our president is going to work with us to structurally reform our budget and spending. I think that's the most important thing we could do long term. But right now, Matt, the most important thing we can do is don't play politics. with this funding relief for this disaster, get our fellow Texans what they need right now to keep going.
Hey, Congressman, do you think this was a wake-up call to some of the Republicans, especially on the Senate side, that have been playing politics and haven't been taking care of business for what they're voted into office for?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think he I think he's got them rattled, and I think there was some message there that he had hoped that they would get in that, and I'm not sure that that's a bad idea. Look, the linchpin to tax reform and so much of our conservative agenda has been the repeal of Obamacare, not to mention just doing what we promised we said we'd do for 7 years, right?
Congressman?
Yeah.
Did you watch 60 Minutes last night and see the Charlie Rose interview of Bannon?
I read about it, but I didn't see it.
Yeah, okay. Well, he had some interesting things to say. Bannon had some interesting things to say about the swamp, and you ought to read that.
Well, I read that he's going to do everything he can to challenge put primary challengers out there for senators who didn't get off the dime and help us.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think we should do whatever we can to put pressure on the Senate to act and do what we've done in the House. It's frustrating because it's, so much is in our control and some of it's out of our control. So I'm sending a letter in the next day or two to Mitch McConnell, and I'm getting as many signatures from my freshman class saying, we promised we'd do this. We've got to give these guys relief, and our entire agenda, is hanging on this. So
I'm getting these signatures.
All right. Well, Congressman, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, guys. Good to be with you.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. Okay. Always interesting to talk to our congressman from our 19th District of Texas. It is 7, well, let's call it 8 o'clock. And we'll be back on the other side of this break.